What would you eat if the world collapsed tomorrow? No fridge, no stove, no help, just wind, ice, and silence. It's the middle of winter. The snow has covered every trail. The firewood is gone. The last root cellar is empty. At 22 hours of a freezing night, a mother breaks a dark piece of acorn bread in half. It's the last food in the entire house. Her child looks up. She doesn't cry. She's too tired to cry. Outside, wolves howl. Inside, the smoke from a dying fire clings to the wooden walls. The air smells of wet wool, fear, and hunger. You feel your stomach turn. Not from hunger, from the thought that this was normal for thousands of families across medieval Europe. This was life. This was survival. In silence, they endured. With forgotten foods, they resisted famine. And while modern life distracts us with comfort, these ancient secrets remain hidden, waiting to be remembered. In this video, you'll discover the 7 forgotten foods that saved entire families from starvation, and why they might save us too. It's the dead of winter. Outside, the wind claws at the wooden walls like a hungry beast. Inside, silence is broken only by the faint hiss of a dying fire and the shallow breathing of those who remain. The temperature has dropped well below 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything is frozen. The water bucket turned to ice at sunrise. The sky is grey, not a beautiful grey, the kind of grey that steals hope. In the center of the room, a woman kneels beside an iron pot. Steam rises gently, but barely. Inside, nettle leaves and burdock root float in a thin broth. She stirs it slowly, as if prolonging the moment before admitting, this is all they have. Not a meal, a memory disguised as nourishment, a handful of forgotten herbs, and faith. She calls her daughter. The little one's hands are blue, her lips are cracked. She doesn't ask for bread anymore. She knows there isn't any. The mother cups the child's face and hands her a bowl of the bitter soup. No words are exchanged. In the Middle Ages, hunger had no language, only ritual. Somewhere in the village, a bell tolls once. Not for time, for death. Another family has lost someone. And still, the woman stirs the pot. This was the life of a medieval peasant, day after day, night after night, in frozen villages, scattered across forgotten hills. These weren't scenes from fantasy, they were real. Centuries before supermarkets, electricity, or central heating, families survived with ancestral techniques, sacred patience, and a kind of quiet strength that most of us have never been asked to find. There was no rescue coming, no modern solution. Just the earth, the fire, the herbs, and the will. This is where our story truly begins. But what none of them knew was how much they were already forgetting. What would you feel sitting in that cold room, holding that bowl of survival in your hands? Tell us in the comments. When the last sack of wheat was gone and even the rats had nothing left to steal, the medieval peasants turned to the forest. Not for game. There were no animals brave enough to walk in the snow, but for something deeper, older, hidden beneath the fallen leaves. Acorns. Not the kind you roast for flavor, but the kind you pray will not poison your child. It's still early morning before the weak sun warms the village walls. The temperature is well below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and every breath fogs the air like smoke. Inside a cracked stone hut, a young girl kneels over a wooden bowl. Her fingers tremble, not just from the cold, but from the responsibility in front of her. She's making acorn flour. Her father sits nearby, sharpening a blade that's lost its edge long ago. The sound is more ritual than purpose. It's been days since they had meat, but the movement keeps his hands warm and his thoughts quiet. Back to the girl. She takes the brown, bitter nuts and begins the ancient process passed down since before the 18th century. First, wash again and again to remove the bitter tannins, then dry, then grind, then sift. Each step is crucial. If she fails, the flour turns toxic. If she succeeds, the bread could sustain her family for days. This was one of many ancestral techniques that separated life from death in frozen villages across Europe. A lost knowledge, a form of resistance without technology. While today we throw away stale bread, she treats every flake of flour like a sacred offering. She adds a handful of snow to cool the dough, Her hands are red, cracked, bleeding slightly. She doesn't stop, she can't. Her little brother is asleep under a wool sheet, his breathing faint. The bread needs to be ready before nightfall, because after 22 hours of the night, the cold is no longer merciful. In those brutal winters, bread wasn't food, it was armor. Each slice forged not in fire, but in desperation, tradition, and courage. This isn't about being rustic. This isn't a lifestyle trend. This is what it meant to live in the hunger in the Middle Ages, to turn what grows under trees into salvation. Medieval survival wasn't romantic. It was relentless. Can you imagine trusting your child's life to a recipe made from tree bark and bitter nuts? Would you know what to do, or would hunger win? The snow hasn't stopped in days. The rooftops of the village are no longer visible, buried beneath a white silence that muffles even the screams of hunger. The wind lashes through the cracks in every wooden door. Inside, families huddle like fading embers, trying not to go out. There is no more meat. The grain bins were emptied before the last full moon. Even the rats have vanished. All that remains grows from the soil, if you dare to touch it. Beyond the edge of the village, a woman kneels by a frozen fence, her fingers digging slowly beneath the frost. She wears no gloves. Frostbite has already claimed parts of her fingertips, but she knows where they grow, along the stone walls where the sun once kissed just enough warmth into the earth. And there they are, dark green, defiant, alive. Nettle. The leaves sting her palms like tiny blades, but she doesn't flinch. Pain is familiar now. She gathers a handful into a cloth pouch and turns back, her footprints already fading behind. She moves quickly, not because of the cold, but because she doesn't want to be seen. Not by the others. Not while she's risking everything for leaves others call weeds. But because she doesn't want to be seen. Inside her stone shelter, the fire is weak. Just a sliver of flame, no higher than her thumb. She fills a pot with water from melted snow, drops the leaves in, and stirs. It's not a recipe. It's a ritual of medieval survival, a technique passed from one desperate winter to the next. The nettle soup, or nettle soup, was not made for taste. It was made for resistance without technology, for strength pulled from bitterness. A young man lies near the fire. His leg is bandaged in linen soaked with honey and ash. He hasn't spoken in 2 days. The fever has taken his voice, his breath. Fear's shallow. The woman kneels beside him, cups a wooden bowl and brings it to his lips. He sips. Slowly, then again. The soup is rich in iron, in minerals, in memory. This is forgotten wisdom, the kind of knowledge that never made it into books, because it was never glamorous. It was too ordinary, too dirty, too cold, but it worked. Out there, in frozen villages, during brutal winters, nettle soup saved thousands, who had nothing else. While nobles feasted behind castle walls, the medieval peasants learned to extract life from what others feared to touch. The soup hisses gently in the pot. She adds a pinch of salt, a treasure in itself, and sits, watching him breathe. For now he lives, for now this green potion is enough. No one would believe it today. That a stinging weed boiled in snow could be the difference between death and dawn. But in the hunger in the Middle Ages, the most powerful meals were the ones no one remembers, except those who lived to tell the tale. If these ancestral techniques stir something deep within you, if you feel the echo of survival in your soul, support our mission. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. Let's awaken what the world forgot. Would you dare taste the bitterness of survival, or wait for comfort that may never return? Today you open an app and food arrives in 20 minutes. A steaming meal sealed in plastic, dropped at your door without a word. If you're cold, you turn a dial. If you're sick, a screen connects you to help. If you're hungry, you scroll. But what if the screen stays black? What if one morning the signal never returns? What if the power hum in your walls vanishes, not for minutes, but for days, weeks? At first, you'd think it's temporary. That help is on the way. But the sun begins to set, and by 22 hours of the night, the silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's absolute. No buzz, no lights, just wind, walls, and questions. You open your fridge. The light is off. So is the stove. You wait, but nothing. comes. Now imagine it's winter, not a cozy winter with fleece blankets and cocoa. A brutal medieval winter, where outside it's colder than 68 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping, where the roads are gone beneath the snow, where your pantry holds condiments, but not calories. How long could you last? Now walk into the mind of a medieval peasants. No apps, no signal, no emergency numbers, just instincts and forgotten wisdom. They didn't wait for rescue. They didn't expect aid. They used what grew in the soil: bark, roots, leaves, fire. They survived famine in the 18th century, not with stockpiles, but with skill, ancestral techniques that most of us wouldn't even recognize today. Could you identify burdock root in the forest? Could you harvest nettle without gloves? Could you cook without gas or preserve food without a fridge? We live in a time of abundance, but that abundance has made us fragile. Our ancestors lived in scarcity, and that scarcity made them strong. Truth is brutal. Most of us only survive while the lights are on. So ask yourself, if your world turned dark tonight, if the grid died with the sun, would you know how to feed your family? Or are we just pretending to be prepared, as long as the Wi-Fi still works? The wind has shifted. You can hear it, not just outside, but through the walls. It pushes against the wooden slats like a beast, testing the strength of the home. The fire is gone. The snowdrifts have reached the top of the windows. The world is pale and still. The family breathes. There is no more flour. Not even the bitter acorn dust remains. No herbs, no roots, no soup. The hunger is not just in their stomachs now. It's in their bones. It fogs their minds, makes their limbs feel slow. And yet, one last thing remains. A bundle of bark, stripped. Weeks ago from the birch trees behind the chapel, hidden beneath hay to keep it from freezing. No one thought it would come to this. The inner bark, soft, pale, stringy, useless to most. But to the medieval peasants, it was salvation carved from the skin of the forest. They would dry it, pound it, grind it into a dusty powder, mix it with melted snow, and if lucky, a spoon of clay or ashes from yesterday's fire. Knead, shape, bake on stone, and then somehow decall it bread. This was not a tale of resourcefulness. It was resilience without technology. A war waged against the cold and the dark, with weapons no sharper than memory. Inside a cramped hut, a man kneels. His back is bent, his shoulders trembling from days without rest. In his hands he holds a chunk of something grey, dense, cold, a tree bark bread, the last meal. He turns to his son. The child is no longer speaking, just looking, waiting. The man prays, not loudly, not to the sky, but into the quiet wood around him. A whisper from the hunger in the Middle Ages passed down from father to son. Let this be enough. And it is. Barely. The child chews slowly. He doesn't cry. He just eats. That's what this bread was. Not food, not comfort. A barrier. Between life and the grave. Between one more day or none at all. We don't talk about this kind of bread in modern kitchens. It doesn't have a recipe on YouTube. There's no medieval cookbook for despair. But this was real. This was forgotten wisdom. In frozen villages, buried under frost and silence, bark bread was more than nourishment. It was defiance. The trees became allies. The forest a pantry for the forgotten. And the humans, they became what they had to become. Survivors of the old world. Carriers of techniques born in desperation, wrapped in dirt and delivered in hope. Now look around. Your shelves are full, but your hands, do they know what to do when nothing is left? If tomorrow offered you nothing but bark and fire, would you remember how to eat like they did, or fade like the stories we've chosen to forget? Imagine your child asking you for food, but you have nothing left to offer. No refrigerator hum, no gas flame, no soft beep from a microwave. Just the bitter scent of herbs simmering in a cracked pot, and the whisper of the wind scraping against wooden walls. The kitchen is no longer a place of nourishment. It's a shrine of memory, silent, cold, a space where hunger is not just felt, it's worshipped through endurance. You kneel down. Your hands dig into a wooden box beneath the floorboards, searching for something, anything. You find roots, not the kind from markets or gardens, but twisted, frozen strands from the forest. Edge. Fingers numb, you lift them like relics. This is it, you whisper. This is everything. No one speaks. Your child watches, waiting, trusting. You boil snow in an iron pot, toss in the roots, and stir without hope of flavor. There will be no second serving. No salt, no fat, just warmth. Enough to keep the cold from winning. You don't cook, you pray. Every meal is now a silent prayer against death. A fragile contract between body and spirit, sealed with forgotten wisdom and the will to endure. You close your eyes. You feel the breath of the fire, weak but alive. And you wonder, not when this will end, but if you've done enough. If the earth, the past, the ancient skills still remember how to protect those who remember them. Because in those frozen villages, during the hunger in the Middle Ages, food wasn't just survival. It was ceremony. Each root, each broth, each bitter sip, a liturgy in the language of loss and resistance. Now open your eyes. You're back in your world. Lights flicker, screens glow, shelves are full, but somewhere, deep in your bones, would you recognize the taste of survival, or only notice it once it's too late? Not all survival happened deep in the forest. Some battles were fought at the edge of the sea, where wind met salt, and the waves crashed like warnings. Along the jagged coastlines of the north, there were no trees to harvest, no roots to dig, just water, just tide, and what the sea left behind. In these remote fishing villages, where frozen villages clung to the cliffs like frost-bitten fingers, the winters were just as cruel, and sometimes more silent. No firewood, no meat, just ice, fog, and the roar of the ocean. But the medieval peasants were never helpless. They had something the world would later forget, a technique as old as the tide itself. Dried seaweed. When the storms allowed, they'd walk to the shore, carefully, slowly, searching the rocks for strips of kelp left behind by the waves. Not all seaweed was edible, but they knew which ones held iron, calcium, strength. They would lay the strands over stone, letting the pale sun dry them out, wind-cured, salt-preserved, then stored in bundles, rolled like rope, tied with twine made of grass or wool. It didn't need fire. It didn't spoil quickly. It wasn't a meal, but it kept the body alive when everything else was gone. In the brutal winters, when boats froze in place and the sea became a graveyard of silence, these strips of green saved lives. A man could chew one while walking, tuck another inside his coat, and ration the rest. Minerals, fiber, hope. There's a story of an old fisherman from the coast of what is now Norway, who survived 3 entire winters with little more than dried fish skin and seaweed. He said he'd forgotten the taste of stew, but never forgot the texture of kelp between his teeth. He'd laugh when he said it, but his eyes were sharp with memory. This was resilience without technology, a bond with the sea that modern. Life has washed away. Today, seaweed is trendy in fancy kitchens, but then it was survival in a salted ribbon, a lifeline tossed by the waves themselves. Picture it now, a grey sky, a man kneeling on frozen rocks, his fingers raw, his coat soaked. And still, he works, he gathers, he believes in what others ignore, because sometimes the smallest thing, the thing we dismiss, becomes the thread that holds everything together. If these forgotten memories stir something ancient in your soul, join us. Like this video and subscribe to our journey into ancestral survival, and tell me this, would you kneel on the icy shore, chewing salt and kelp, just to see another morning? The sky is not just grey, it's leaden, oppressive, like it's trying to fall on the earth. The cold isn't sharp anymore, it's heavy. It settles into bones, into thoughts. It doesn't bite, it buries. It is the coldest winter of the decade, and the village knows it. The elders whisper it behind closed doors. The youngest don't understand the weight of that sentence. They just feel the weight in their stomachs. 3 families have already lost children, not to illness, not to wolves, but to silence, the kind of silence that comes when the body gives up before the morning fire returns. Outside, snow covers everything, the barns, the fences, even the paths between homes, as if the world itself no longer wants to be walked. Inside one of these frozen villages, a woman stares into a pot. Her hands are stiff, her lips are cracked, her eyes don't blink. She scrapes the bottom slowly, rhythmically, but it's no longer about the food. There is none. It's just a motion, a ritual, a refusal to let go. Her children sleep in a pile of rags by the wall. No one moves, no one speaks. There is no fire left. The last log was burned 2 nights ago. The walls are starting to sweat with cold. Frost forms inside the windows. Inside, she presses the wooden spoon into the pot again, and this time it hits bare iron. Nothing, not even broth. She lowers her head, presses her forehead to the edge of the pot, and breathes. This is not cinematic. This is not poetic. This is what hunger in the Middle Ages looked like. The medieval peasants didn't starve in chaos. They starved in silence, with their heads high, with their hands still working, with their spirits holding on to something deeper. Ancestral techniques, hope etched into routine, but hope begins to thin. The animals are gone. The neighbors stopped knocking. The wind now sounds like it's calling names. The bells of the chapel haven't rung in days. Even the priests are too weak to stand. The snow outside is rising, piling against the doors. The sky won't clear. It's like the sun has forgotten them. And through it all, resilience without technology still pulses. A kind of quiet war. A woman with nothing still scraping a pot, still refusing to say it's over, still praying, perhaps, that something, anything, will be remembered in time. If this were your winter, would you fall into the silence, or scream loud enough to shake the snow from the heavens? There were no guarantees, no promises of spring, no calendars marked with hope. In those frozen villages, faith was not a prayer whispered under breath. It was action, quiet, methodical, desperate action, and it was one of the most powerful forms of medieval survival ever practiced. They called it stockpiling by faith. It began with a hole, dug before the earth froze, a pit deep and narrow lined with straw sealed with stone. Inside they placed the roots they had gathered, the bitter, frost-resistant plants that barely passed as food, carrots, burdock, turnips, sometimes even bark scraps covered, marked, buried, no locks, no guards, no guarantee it would last. They would walk away heads down, never certain they'd return before hunger found them. This was an ancestral technique, passed from the mouths of the oldest survivors to the hands of those still learning to hold a blade. Not because it always worked, but because it was the only choice. They didn't know how many days of winter were left. No forecasts, no satellites, just instincts, patterns, stories, faith, and so they buried food. In the brutal winters, they prayed not for abundance, but for enough. They measured calories like candles, hoping one more would burn through the next night. When others hoarded with fear, the medieval peasants buried with trust, not in the land, not in luck, but in their ability to return when it mattered most. They did not wait to be saved. They prepared to save themselves, even when they weren't. Sure, they'd survive long enough to benefit. One man from the coastal north buried his last sack of dried roots with a handful of dried fish and a carved wooden cross. It was all he had. When asked why he risked losing it to the earth, he answered, "Because I still believe we'll see the thaw." That's what this was. Not optimism. Resilience without technology. A fight fought with silence, memory, and motion. They stored not only food, but belief. The lesson? Store what you can while you can. Not just in cellars, in skill, in memory, in community, because even when you have nothing left, knowing what to do next can still save you. If tomorrow the frost came early and stayed too long, would you bury your hope, or prepare it like gold beneath the soil? What if tonight was the last night with light? What if after 22 hours of nightfall, the power didn't come back? No flicker, no hum, just silence. Cold growing silence. Could you feed your family? Not with canned goods or take-out menus, not with flashlights or credit cards, but with ancestral knowledge, with hands, with fire, with earth. Could you keep them warm without gas? Could you boil snow without a stove? Could you silence their hunger with a handful of bark or root? This question isn't fantasy. It's not drama. It's history, and it's a possibility we've ignored for too long. The medieval peasants didn't get warnings. No headlines. Told them when the storm would come, when the roads would vanish, when the hunger would settle in like a second skin. They didn't get help. They became help. For each other. For themselves. In those frozen villages, they didn't panic when the light disappeared, because most of them had never depended on it. They knew how to dig, dry, preserve, ferment. They had forgotten foods that didn't just nourish. They protected. They endured brutal winters not with luck, but with legacy. Now we live in houses full of light. We speak to machines. We store food in silent boxes. But if it all blinked out at once, if this century cracked and gave way to the dark again, would we remember anything? Would we know what our ancestors knew? Or would we realize too late that convenience made us forget how to endure, the recipes that needed no fire, the shelters built with bare hands, the resilience without technology that turned roots into meals and herbs into hope? Ask yourself this honestly. If the world began to forget, would you be one of the few who remembered, or would you realize, too late, that you never knew how to survive in the first place? Because light is easy to depend on until it's gone, and then only one question remains: what did you keep alive when the world went dark? They didn't survive because they had more. They survived because they knew what to do with less. They had nothing, but they remembered everything. Because when the snow fell harder, they dug deeper. When the food ran out, they remembered what others forgot. When the light disappeared, they became the fire. Every leaf, every root, every bitter crust of bark bread was more than a meal. It was a message, a legacy, a silent, unbroken scream from one generation to the next. We will not disappear. They turned hunger into ritual, cold into caution, silence into strength. They didn't wait for comfort. They forged it with cracked hands, with whispered prayers, with ancestral techniques carved not into books but into muscle, habit, soil, smoke. They walked barefoot through winters we can't imagine. They carried knowledge in their blood, and with that knowledge they lit torches in a world that had forgotten the sun, and we buried that torch. We traded it for convenience. We let the cold become myth, the hunger become history. We laughed at the old ways and left the books unread, but the knowledge didn't die. It waits, quiet, beneath the noise, beneath the asphalt, in caves, in seeds, in stories not yet fully lost. And now, maybe it's time to listen again. Not because the lights are off, but because we finally feel the chill, because survival isn't about having more. It's about remembering what mattered when there was nothing left. And the question now is simple: will you carry the fire, or wait for the darkness to teach you how? If your heart beat stronger during this story, if something deep within you whispered remember, then you already belong to us. Join the brotherhood of ancestral guardians and those who carry the forgotten fire. Subscribe now, not just to a channel, but to a mission to keep this ancient wisdom alive. Write in the comments below, which ancestral technique would you use first to survive a brutal winter? Let your voice echo with theirs, the voices of those who refused to be erased. And if this story moved you, if it lit even a spark, leave a like. It's a simple act, but one that strengthens our circle and fuels this sacred task of remembrance. Share this video with someone who may one day need to know, because saving knowledge might one day save a life. And now, your path doesn't end here. Click on the next video appearing on your screen. Another step on your journey of resilience, preparation, and soul-deep memory. May your fire never fade, and may the old ways find their way back through you.